This is the third installment of our Grad School 101 workshop series, focusing on time management, how to balance coursework, research, and outreach. So thank you everyone for joining. We are honored to have an amazing panel prepared for you guys. So I'm gonna now introduce myself. I am your humble host and moderator. My name is Sergio Labra. I am executive director of GSEC, one of the co-directors, and I am a fourth-year graduate student doing neuroscience and some chemical biology at Scripps Research in La Jolla, California. Now I'm gonna let our panelists introduce themselves. We have Christopher, Jamie, and Katelyn. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and maybe a little bit about what you do, how you manage your time in general. We can get started with you, Jamie.
Sure. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm glad everyone could join us today. My name is Jamie and I am in a mechanical engineering program at the University of Michigan. And I'm currently in my third year, so in the thick of it. I guess as far as kind of the things that I can speak to in terms of time management, it's definitely been a journey for me. I think there's some kind of unique challenges to grad school, so I'm excited to talk about it. Over time, I've sort of balanced out for myself between research, obviously, as we're all doing coursework at University of Michigan. We do about one course a term, so that's where I'm currently at. That helps provide context. And then I do some like K-12 outreach work through Tau Beta Pi and a couple of other groups. So that's something that kind of helps round things out, as well as mentorship programs like this. And then the latest challenge to the time management has been getting a puppy. So I have a little pup sleeping behind me. And some kind of personal hobbies and things like that. But I'm really excited to get to talk to you all and see if I can offer any ideas. Yeah.
Chris, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Christopher. I am a chemical biology PhD student at the University of Michigan as well. I am also in my third year. So as far as like the things I'm involved with here, like obviously like research work. I'm in a very interdisciplinary lab, so I get to do many different types of experiments, ranging from like computational work to like imaging and a lot of biochemistry. So managing those things has been a struggle. I also do a lot of outreach work, so I'm involved in the SACNAS chapter here on campus, with planning and then developing outreach programs there. The things for us like how I manage my time. I schedule things kind of like ahead, like a week ahead of time, like, oh, what I want to do next week, like set kind of goals for myself. And I rely a lot on like online like applications like Google Calendar or something called Notion to keep track of everything that needs to happen. And yeah, that is kind of the gist of about me.
Hi everyone, my name is Katelyn. I also go by Katie though, so if that slips out, you can say that too. I'm a fourth year student now, which is kind of crazy to say. At University in the Quantitative and Computational Biology program. And I guess like the things that I'm juggling in my life, obviously there's research. I'm actually done with courses now, but I do have experience, from previous years of juggling courses. And then I'm also involved, obviously, in some outreach, mentorship opportunities like this one, as well as actually the other one that I know of, GSMI, which is also through Cientifico Latino. And then I'm also involved in an organization on my campus, which is called GWISE, Graduate Women in Science and Engineering. I'm acting as the president, so there's lots of work involved in that with managing my time. And then, yeah, I also prioritize, my relationships with my friends and family, so I can talk about trying to juggle that as well.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So how would you say that you learn to manage your time when you started first grad school? Did you already have some of these skills, or the requirements and demands of grad school demanded you to really develop some other or different skills along the way? Anyone?
I experimented a lot my first couple of years to figure out what worked for me. So in my program, we front load coursework to the first year, and then we can take a couple classes or second year. So I was busy with that, and then also rotations, and trying to learn about a new city, a new school, what's happening. So I just kind of figured that whatever I did as an undergrad wouldn't necessarily work, which is to kind of go with the flow. It was very chaotic. And so in graduate school, I experimented with structure, kind of figuring out when am I most productive during the day? What would work for me best? I'm whether I'm doing bench work or computer work. Things like time blocking really helped me figure that out. And those things change. So it's also very malleable. So yeah, I think just knowing yourself and knowing how you function is really helpful in terms of planning and stuff.
I would say I kind of in undergrad developed a good scheduling system for myself that worked really well. And it's kind of weird, but I use Excel as my schedule because I can just have complete control over it. I don't like the calendar apps, they bother me. And so I developed that in undergrad, and that was good and all. But then obviously grad school, I think the biggest transition for me was realizing that I need to flip my priorities. Whereas in undergrad, I was mostly focused on classes. And then when I wasn't doing classes, I could do research. And then when I got into grad school, and especially talking to some of the upper year students in my program and getting their advice on this, our first year we do rotations, and they said, to focus more on rotations if you can than your courses. Do your courses enough to do them and learn, but really try to focus on research and figure out what you want to do. And so I kind of had to learn to flip those priorities, but still use my same scheduling techniques that I had developed. So
I think for me, I had, I guess opposite to Christopher, I expected the same system to work for me in grad school. And so I started doing the same thing, and it quickly did not work. I think some differences that have popped out to me over time and have taken some getting used to is, one, I feel like in undergrad, I was able to work more hours per week or have less downtime, but then I had a lot of breaks, right? So you have Thanksgiving break, and then you have Christmas break, and then you have spring break, and then you have a lot of summer and stuff like that. And with grad school, because it depends on the program and the PI, obviously, but because you're typically more in this work life type style where you get a couple of weeks off, like you're in the job market, you can't run yourself as ragged, I guess. Or at least for me, that hasn't worked. And so I was finding out how to kind of preserve my own time. And that kind of leads into the second main difference that I think I had to acclimate to. And that would be that in undergrad, the nice thing about it is you're given really clear expectations, right? So it's okay, if you complete this assignment, you get the right answer, you're done. You are done with your work. And in grad school, with the nature of research, it's felt more you could keep working as many hours as you wanted. You're never done, right? And so if you come in with this kind of view, like I did from undergrad of oh, you work until it's done, you could work forever. And so for me, it's been kind of switching mentally from, I guess, do everything that's on your plate to look at what's on your plate and what things do you have to do, what things do you want to do, and what things can you cut. And that's helped me in that kind of transition to having less structure, creating my own boundaries and downtimes, and taking weekend time and stuff where I want to, so that I don't end up in that position of like, oh, I really need a 3-week Christmas break and I don't get 3 weeks, you know? So just a few comments kind of leading into it. I'm sure someone that'll bleed over and have their questions.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that. And I think we're getting to the key of like during grad school, you have to really juggle a lot of different things through your coursework and your research as you are finding new labs, reaching out to other people, talking to others to seek for advice. And if you are interested in doing also outreach or volunteering activities, we get to the problem that not everyone is great at prioritizing. So what advice would you give in terms of how to really best learn, or like how to prioritize, if you have any system in place that has worked with you or something alike? Jamie, you were talking about, prioritizing. So you want to say a little bit more?
Yeah.
How you do
Yeah, sure. One thing I think that's helped been, taking the time to build an idea of what you want from grad school. And I think I got that advice when I was coming into grad school, and I was like, what? I don't know how to do that, and forgot about it. I really would recommend it, and knowing that it may be something that evolves or changes, even if you have a fuzzy idea right now, it's something, right? And that's helped me to say, okay, these types of things that I feel pressure in academia to do or to prioritize, maybe some of those I do want to do, maybe I don't, and instead to decide more on what path I want to take. So I'm more interested in going towards industry. There are things that if you want to become a professor, you kind of need to be doing that I don't. And you can help kind of create room for yourself to put towards the things you do want to do. And as you're thinking through that, maybe another thing to think about that I found helpful is picturing it as kind of a trade-off. So you could work as fast as you possibly could on your research, and you might get out and through the PhD faster. And maybe that's your priority. Or maybe there are things you want to get during grad school, like engagement in different groups, mentorship, things like that. Coursework, like you can think of coursework as another thing of getting out, right? Maybe you want to put a little bit more time towards that, acknowledging and talking to your PIs about, does this affect your kind of your trajectory in the amount of time you're at the university?
Yep.
So it's just kind of really taking the time to think through those things instead of just reacting and doing what you have to do, which is hard when you have a lot of demands on you, but still.
Yeah. Anyone else has any system in place or very much agrees with Jamie?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of those things, right? In the context of like long-term goals and establishing what it is that you want to do and when you hope to get out of graduate school. But I think on a more like micro scale level, the way I tend to function is like, into priorities, it's like, well, what's a deadline coming up? So that needs to get done. And then figuring out like, what do I enjoy doing at this moment in time? And then obviously like having those discussions with like your faculty advisor about like what are your immediate goals in terms of your research and like what needs to be prioritized specifically towards those goals. With coursework, obviously, like there's like a syllabus and stuff, so that's a little more laid out in terms of what needs to be prioritized, and then with outreach, I think if it's something you really enjoy doing, then you'll find the time for it. And obviously don't try to like go all out with stuff, find like one or two things that you just like really love doing. And then whenever those opportunity arises, then, make time for those and then schedule work and other stuff around that, so that you do have those boundaries set and you don't feel like guilty for doing one thing over the other, because they're all things that you want to do.
Yeah, I think also kind of more on that short-term time scale, I think it's important to know how you work well. So depending on the tasks that I'm prioritizing, generally speaking with my research, I'm working on like a few different projects right now. So there's going to be multiple different things that I have to do. And so some weeks that means that I have to schedule my week so that I spend a little bit of time on all of them. So I'm moving them all forward and I don't feel like I'm letting anything go. But sometimes there's certain tasks I need to do where I know that the way I work, it's really hard for me to juggle that with something else. So for example, like writing, I had like a grant due about a month ago or something like that. And I'm really not good at juggling writing and experiments. It's just too hard for me to like, the 1 hour break and waiting for this time set to like write. And so because I know that about myself, I know that, maybe then I need to set aside like a whole day for writing and then try to juggle my research and my experiments around that. Like how many days should I give to this? And then how much does that leave me for also pushing this forward? So I think it's good to learn how you work, like what things you can juggle at the same time, what things you can't, and then how that's going to change how you schedule things.
I completely agree with everything both of you were saying. One thing to add on the shorter term scale, based on what Christopher was saying, it reminded me of something that I still struggle with. Is as I'm thinking through the tasks, a personal challenge for me, and maybe Katelyn and Christopher have interesting ideas on this, is looking at things that have concrete deadlines, and often those are coursework assignments, and not over prioritizing coursework when research is the key of your PhD, right? Because there's those deadlines that are driving that. And for me, that's just keeping it in mind and hoping to back off. But I don't know if either of you guys have other ideas.
Yeah, I think kind of going along with that, for things that don't actually have a hard deadline, I try to give myself like soft deadlines so that I also like schedule them in without like prioritizing, like you said, those hard deadlines. But then I just have to acknowledge that like it's a soft deadline I made myself. So sometimes that means I have to move it because something with like a hard deadline comes up. So
to give a more specific example and related to a question submitted, how would you manage your time when you are starting to prepare for, say, your qualifying exam? Like this is more on the research side. It's a big, bulky undertaking that you want to do well. It's stressful for most of us. Any advice?
Yeah, so I can just tell you how it went for me. Our qualifying exam we write like this big proposal for our full thesis, what we're going to do research-wise, and then we do like a chalk talk with a few professors. And it happens halfway through your second year. And I remember the summer after my first year, I was starting to get really nervous for it. And so I talked to my advisor about it and kind of followed his advice. So definitely this is like, as you're preparing for your quals, talk to your advisor if you have a faculty advisor. Because, first of all, they're going to have certain potentially expectations for you that you should keep in mind, but also they can be really helpful. So what my advisor recommended was, okay, take however many weeks you need. I think he said something like 4 to 6. And set your date and then go back 4 to 6 weeks, and that's the date that you can stop doing all the research that you're trying to do to prepare for your quals and have something, some preliminary data to present, and then stop and just work on the writing and the reading and preparing for it. And so I ended up following that, and it worked really well for me because, as I said earlier, it's hard for me to juggle experiments and like writing and also reading tons of papers. And so that's kind of the way I did it. So I got to work really, really hard on research and not stress about it until that deadline. And then at that deadline, I was like, okay, I've done enough. I have enough preliminary data, like it's gonna be okay. And now I can just move on and focus on just the reading, the writing, the practices, and all of that stuff. But definitely that's based off of how you work. Maybe you want to juggle both. I did have some friends who were doing some experiments, up to like the week before theirs. But that was the way it worked for me. And luckily my advisor's advice worked really well for me.
That's great. Yeah. And a little like this was a question submitted in advance. How do you balance multiple projects? If say your thesis lab or your chosen lab has, you know, different projects that may not be so overlapping, where you have to do progress, you know, on board, show results. This also applies for people that are considering or already involved in co-mentorship with more than one PI. So how do you manage multiple projects?
I can't over recommend just talking a lot to your PI. Even with what Katelyn's saying, like the main thread that I'm getting from that is like she talked to her PI and she was able to find a plan that worked for her type of research and her type of qualifying exams. I had a very different, you know, outcome because I have a different system that I had to work in. Same thing with deciding on projects. I think it's going to end up really individualized. So a couple of things that have kind of changed the number of projects I have on my plate over time, where my funding is coming from. If you're funded on one project, it may be expected that you're putting in all your time to that project. It may not. And then your own kind of personality with it. At least something that worked well for me was starting out with a smaller number of projects and kind of adding on as I felt I could. But there have been times where I've talked to my PIs and said, hey, like, I feel like I'm trying to do too many in parallel and I'm not making a lot of headway anywhere. And so like, can we table this one, or what one is kind of at the bottom of the rank, and we can hold it aside for a little bit and then we'll come back to it. And at least in my experience, as long as you're having those conversations and letting your PI know how it's going, they're just happy to have you working at your best and they'll understand that.
Yeah, that's great. So for those of you that do use planners or journals or Excel sheets, are there any other that maybe haven't been mentioned or where you would like to maybe expand upon that really help you track your lab tasks or to-do lists or other involvements that in which you are involved?
I mentioned it earlier during the introduction, but I use this app called Notion, which sometimes I feel like I'm like some like spokesperson for Notion because I like just talk about it to like everybody I meet. But it's just like a database kind of thing that you can modify to your own personal like needs or requirements. And the way I use it is to keep like projects separated under different like sections, and then I'll just like list out like whatever like every couple weeks, just like what are all like the next steps for each individual project under each thing, right? Like, oh, I need to do this experiment, this, whatever, you know, so forth. And then from there, I have like an additional one where I plan out like my week. So for each day of the week, I have just like specific goals of things that I want to get done. And of course, those things change depending on how things go. And then, so that's usually how I keep track of that stuff. So I advise it. I think you get like the upgraded plan if you have like a student email, which gives you all these other cool capabilities. Look it up on YouTube. They can teach you a lot of stuff about how to use it. It can be a little overwhelming, but once you have a system that you find that works for you, and I would not function in graduate school without it, honestly.
I think, so in addition to the Excel, which is like for my schedule, I also use OneNote, which is for like all of my research stuff. I actually use it instead of like having a written lab notebook. It was something my PI actually wanted us to have, was to have an electronic one. And so when we were in that transition phase of getting an electronic one, I tried a few out. So I would recommend like trying out a few different like apps or softwares you've heard of, and just see how you like them. And I ended up doing OneNote, and in particular, it was useful because there were some older grad students in my lab who had done it. So I got to get experience from them. And like, if I ever had any problems, I could ask them a question. But also one of them was a graduate student I worked with and like followed up on his research. And so I've actually looked at his notebook a lot, and that's been really helpful for me on deciding how I'm going to organize mine. I get like little tips and tricks from his. Like I was like, oh, you know what? I like the way he did that better than me. Let me just switch this around. But yeah, I use it for like my daily research notes, my plans for research. I keep copies of meeting notes in there as well, so I can go back to them and reference them. I even technically have a list of like, here's some PIs I might be interested in for postdocs in the future. Like I just put anything research related at all in there and just have it organized. And I think that that's been super helpful.
I'll say I've tried everything you guys are talking about and works for a bunch of people. Honestly, it just stresses me out to no end because I look at the list of things I have to do or like what I was supposed to get done that day. I'm like, I'm not there, you know? So I'll say each find your own kind of way that works for you. I have a much less structured approach because I'll get stressed out, but I know people who do what Katelyn and Christopher are recommending and it's magical for them. So, you know, just know yourself with that.
Yeah, once again, a little related on this. So how do you hold yourself accountable to do sufficient work with accounting for coursework, outside activities? How do you like keep in that sense, keep track of yourself?
Talk to your PIs all the time. Just talk to them about it all the time. My PI was nice enough to kind of, when I came in, give like a generally hours per week kind of expectation that she had of how much work was enough. And then we talk like every semester or so at the end about, okay, how are things going? How much progress am I making compared to what she's expecting? All those sorts of things. And then I keep her posted along the way. I'm like, hey, you know, my anxiety was worse this week. I didn't get as much done. I'm taking these steps to fix it. I'll be fine, you know, as much as you can communicate. I think that's helped me have this sense of like, oh, okay, I am doing enough because I trust that my PI knows how much I should be doing and she says it's enough. So, okay.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful advice. I could myself take advantage of. So in the subject of doing the things that you would like to do and balancing them out with the things that you have to do, you know, how do you not feel guilty to go to seminars while you have research plans that you need to complete, that, you know, you always have to be working on, but there's some workshops or seminars that you're interested? How do you counteract that guilt?
I think one thing is that, and this is going to depend on the type of research you do and your schedule, but at least for me, I'm in an experimental lab, and the seminars that we have are usually like in the middle of the day. And a lot of my experiments have like a step where it's like incubate for 2 hours or something like that. So I can set things up so that my, you know, incubation time period is during that seminar I want to go to. And then I think that helps a lot because I'm still doing all the research I wanted to do that day and I'm still fitting in going to the seminar and it's not prohibiting that. Like, sure, technically I could have stayed back in lab and maybe did some writing or some reading, but I think you just have to acknowledge that you can't be working like all the time. And especially with a seminar, that's not like, you're still using your brain. It's not like a bad break. So I think try not to feel guilty about it and just try to make it fit into your schedule so you can feel better about doing it.
I think too, like depending on the type of learner you are, you can make the argument that going to a seminar actually saves you time. Because at least like for me, I'd rather go like learn from a speaker who's an expert on, you know, whatever field they're in for an hour and listen to them than spending like 5 hours reading like 1 or 2 papers just because I'm a slow reader. So if you like make that, if you convince yourself that that's true and that works for you, then, you know, it's actually beneficial to attend seminars. And I think too, like as a first year student, you just want to learn as much as possible, especially like you're rotating and you're not really sure like what like lab you want to join. Just being exposed to all the types of science out there it's just really cool and can really inform like what you end up doing. So, you know, I think the positives of attending things like that definitely outweigh the potential negatives of just like delaying an experiment by a couple hours or just pushing it over to the next day.
I play the exact same mind game you're talking about, Christopher, where I'm like, this is actually for my research. Another like thing to keep in mind with it is that knowing more about a broader set of ideas and a broader type of research makes you better at the specific thing you want to do, because you're going to have ideas from outside of your bubble. Staying in the same bubble, the same people in the same research community, you're not going to be as creative of a researcher. So I think that you can, you know, over time, just have these ideas come up, you're like, oh, this connects to that. And it's really, it can add a lot of value.
This question is also interesting because, you know, we were talking about coursework, research, seminars, outreach, but there's a lot of other things that we have to do consistently to really do well. And so how do you have, or how do you keep a good eating habits? Sometimes not as easy as it should be.
I look at my week ahead of time. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Jamie.
I would say I look at my week ahead of time, and some weeks, most of the time, I know I'll have enough time to cook and take care of things midweek. Occasionally there's a week and I'm like, oh, I have a midterm and I have this research deadline and it's going to be chaos. So I make a bunch of something on the weekend or whatever and just eat the same thing 10 times. And it's not as fun, but like, it's fine. I just keep in mind that it's, you know, you can skip a meal or sleep less or not get exercise on a very short-term basis, but your PhD is a marathon, not a sprint. And you do need to just kind of have this general health and your own well-being. It has to be a priority.
I was gonna say, I was just saying, I don't really have good eating habits, but what I like, the way I think about with in terms of just like eating or like doing other like activities not related to research, it's just like how much like, do you value your time? Because I mean, as a graduate student, you're probably not making a lot of money, to be honest. And so, you know, it's like, do you want to spend like all these hours like meal prepping or just cooking every day for yourself, or like, do you want to like save that time to do other things, regardless of what they are, like working out, or just taking time for yourself, and then just spend money to like buy food, ideally like healthy food, or stuff that's not gonna make you feel crappy. So yeah, I'm kind of going along with what Jamie was saying. Like I will kind of look ahead of like, oh, I have a busy week. Either I'll cook stuff ahead of time and pack lunches, or I'll just be like, I'll just buy lunch because that's, I don't have the time to do that. Of course, if you hate cooking, then it becomes a different question, but still got it.
Yeah, I think for me, so I wouldn't say I have the best habits because I think that my schedule changes a lot sometimes. But what I've noticed is when I'm more consistent with everything, then like everything works out. So for example, like a consistent sleeping schedule, going to bed around the same time, waking up around the same time, getting into lab around the same time and leaving around the same time, consistently planning out my experiments such that like I have enough to do in a day, but I don't have too much to do. So I'm not working super late. When I do all of those things, my eating tends to be really good and like consistent, and I feel better. But I'm definitely not perfect at that. And I've had times where it's bad and I'm just ordering lots of food at random times. I'm really late in the lab. So, sometimes things happen and your schedule doesn't work out. But the more consistent you can be, I think the better you'll feel and be.
Yeah, this is all great. And for those, I think, that cook, someone in the chat also recommended the app Side Chef for planning dinners ahead of time. So you may want to check it out. And on this subject, how do you make time to engage in social events with your peers? hanging out with friends? How do you make time?
So I guess one thing that's really nice is a lot of my friends here are all really busy with experiments too, so they understand that we have to schedule things weird sometimes. But I think mostly like when I have that consistent scheduling working for research, for example, I tend to have evenings loosely available. Maybe there's stuff I could be doing on my computer, but it's also potentially time that I could be hanging out with friends, and weekends too. So, you know, I just try to, you know, with my group of friends that are also all really busy, we find like an evening or a weekend time where we all happen to have time, and we'll do that like once every few weeks. So it's not, you know, all the time. And then that means, you know, if there's a busy weekend for me research wise, I can, you know, be in the lab if I have to. But then it also gives me something to look forward to when I'm a little less busy. And honestly, the breaks are super helpful for like mental health and everything.
I think setting boundaries is super important. So for example, like when I'm planning stuff ahead, like Monday through Thursday, for example, it's like I am prioritizing my work regardless of like the time of the day, because that varies a lot for me based on scheduling with instrument time and stuff. But then the weekends, like Friday and Sunday, like through Sunday, it's like I'll prioritize like hanging out with friends and stuff. But it's not like mutually exclusive, right? Like if something comes up in the middle of the week and I don't have anything planned already, I'll you know, take the opportunity to go hang out with friends, and then vice versa. Like on the weekend, if like nobody wants to hang out because it's all gloomy outside, like I'll be like, I'll have some time, I'll do some writing or go like, you know, do something that, you know, doesn't necessarily need so much like planning ahead of time, that I can just start and take advantage of the time I have.
I'd recommend, like, for each of you guys thinking about what's recharging for you, what's energizing. For me, a lot of times the more energizing part is being by myself and being outside. So I try to not let that slide as much. I make sure to go outside every day, even if I have a busy day. You have to take some break, right? So I take a little walk outside or whatever. And then knowing kind of, I know for myself, the social component, like I need to have some social time, but, you know, for example, prioritizing my, you know, couple close friends I don't want to lose touch with, and like my partner that I'm doing a distance relationship with, prioritizing that. And then looking at, okay, if the rest of my social calendar varies, for me, that's okay. And there might be other people, Katelyn or Christopher included, that, you know, if they don't have that social contact, they go nuts. So there's no one right balance. Yeah.
Also, just to add real quick, sometimes my social time is at the same time as my work time. So I also have a long distance partner, and sometimes we'll talk or Zoom or something while we're also getting work done. And that can be a nice way to still have that social aspect, but also, you know, you're getting work done and you're not feeling guilty about that.
That is excellent advice. Yep, I agree. And you know, for some people, they are already doing outreach activities, or they are looking to get involved. Some of them find it to be a very re-energizing activity itself. So what are the best ways to get involved in outreach without overextending yourself? Like how to manage your time efficiently so that you can commit a multi-hour outreach event, say once a week. Any specific advice you will have?
I guess I would say to like start small. So maybe if there's one specific outreach or mentorship opportunity you want to get involved in, start with that. And then, you know, maybe it's something that's only like, for example, our program right now, we're meeting like once a month, right? So that doesn't sound like too big of a commitment. And so you could start with something like that, and then you can add on more things. So currently I'm also doing GSMI, and there's a mentorship program for my department, and I'm in that club. but like I've worked up to that where I now kind of know how much I can do. So I think if you can start with like one opportunity that's doesn't seem like too much commitment to you, and once you know how to fit that into your schedule and that you can do it well, then you can start adding more things if you want to.
I absolutely second that. Another thing I did when I was starting to add pieces in was at first looking for things that were less of a consistent commitment. So things that you could sign up to volunteer one weekend, you could sign up a different weekend, but then you could miss the third weekend because you have an exam. So there was more flexibility for me to kind of adapt as I needed to.
Just the last thing is just like find what you really love doing when it comes to outreach, because that will really show when you're doing it, and then you'll just make the time for it, regardless of your other commitments. I think it gets a little tougher when you're like, oh, this might be cool, but then you're not really sure, and then that's where you struggle between your different commitments of like, should I be doing this, should I be not, right? Like if you really enjoy the type of activity you're going to do, then those emotions and feelings tend to experience.
Yeah, I totally support that and agree. On this subject, what are some of the things that you make time for in terms of maintaining and keeping your mental wellness through grad school?
I like to do things on my own a lot. So like I watch movies a lot, probably like one a day, and I'll make sure that there is time for that. And this kind of touches back on like all these other previous questions in terms of like setting goals, which is something I've like mentioned. And for me, they're not really like product driven, like like, oh, I want to get this result or like this data. It's more just like, I want to try this experiment kind of thing, right? And then so even if you don't like accomplish, the thing, you still try it and spend time doing it. And so that really allows me to have time to do other things, because I'd be like, okay, at 10 o'clock, I was going to watch Scarface or something. And so I sit down and watch my movie. Or thing like in terms of like physical activity, like climbing, it's one hobby that I've taken on, and that's actually like quite a bus drive away, and so I have to like actually like schedule that and get to sign up too. So that kind of structural, not pressure, but like it enforces to have me to like plan to do something that's not that, and it makes me feel good. So finding things like that.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of have like two categories of things I like to do in my free time. And one category is like, if I'm so tired and stressed, this is the thing I want to do. Maybe that's like watching a movie or reading. And then I have another category of things where it's like, I like doing this, but I have to kind of already be a little bit refreshed. And that for me can be like art, for example, and painting and stuff like that. And so I just try to figure out how I'm feeling and then decide what kind of activity I want to do based off of that.
Another thing you guys can think about if you're struggling to like find time for those is like, I like what Katelyn was saying about there are things that are like helpful in different ways. And I think being able to identify how you're feeling and what's going to help the most. There are things that I like to do that are re-energizing that take 3 hours. And there are things that I like to do that I know I can get a lot out of 15 or 20 minutes. And then if you have those days where you feel really busy, but you still want to take care of yourself, taking that 15 or 20 minute activity can help you kind of keep some element of that in your day, regardless.
Yep, we go back to what you and Christopher were saying of knowing yourself being really key. Okay, if there are no other questions that you guys want to submit for the panel, we're gonna move on to kind of a final summarizing question on what are the things that you would like say are the most important to become successful at managing your time well. Thinking about the use of planners, being honest with your PI, to set good expectations, working smarter, not harder, maintaining a healthy lifestyle, don't overcommit yourself. If each one of you can kind of highlight one or mention one that maybe hasn't been so stressed out here, we can start with you, Jamie.
Sure. Something that I was noticing, because it wasn't as in the forefront of my mind, but I was hearing a lot from Christopher and Katelyn, was this idea of like trying multiple things. If you're going to try a planner or some way of organizing yourself, trying a couple of different options and seeing what works well for you. I think that can help you find things that are really beneficial, that otherwise it could be easy to stay in your rut and just keep doing the same thing and it would work, but you're missing out on something that you could benefit from.
Christopher?
I think so along those lines, right? I was just like, don't be afraid to like experiment, you know, and try different new things. So I guess kind of along those lines, also just be like, don't be like afraid to fail, or like feel a certain way, because it's gonna happen. Like you're not always just gonna be like feeling super awesome about stuff. And I think realizing that it's okay to feel down sometimes, and knowing that like you'll feel okay again. That's always just, I think, something that's really helped me, because then naturally you'll find like the things that like work for you to make you like, you know, get out of those like ruts, or like when you're feeling down or whatever. So yeah, I think that's something that I think is super important.
I guess kind of in the same vein. So, you know, if you try all these different things and you feel like you know a way that works for you, I think for me, what's kind of happened is I've realized that I sometimes have a way that works for me and sometimes I have a different way depending on my mood. And I guess to explain that, like sometimes just having like this consistent like 9 to 5 kind of schedule every single day and getting stuff done works great. And I love it. And sometimes it's not working so well, or maybe I actually have something that I could do on my computer and I'd rather do it at home, but that means my hours are going to be kind of different sometimes. But I will sometimes be more productive at home and sometimes I'll be less productive at home. And I just kind of have to keep going with the flow of the way that I'm feeling and the mood that I'm in, and realizing that there's multiple things that work at different times and kind of trying to incorporate all of those things.
All of them being excellent points. Thank you. We'll catch you up at the next Grad School 101 workshop series installment. Until then, have a wonderful week and happy early Thanksgiving break.